Hello, my name is Nabuchi Abe, and I am a doctoral student in MPAC Division. This week I'll be leading the discussion about the conceptualization of race and ethnicity as social or biological constructs. I'll be reviewing two articles that show the view of biomedical researchers versus the view of a social scientist. The first article on our list is the importance of race and ethnic background in biomedical research and clinical practice, and is written by Butchard et al. These guys are mainly physicians and biomedical researchers. The second article is by social scientist Frank Rinn, and is titled What to Make of It: The Re-Emergence of Biological Conceptualization of Race in Health Disparities Research. The Butchart article looks at race and ethnic background as geographical and social cultural constructs that have biological ramification. According to the article, racial classification as used in research is based upon the US 2000 census definition. Here, they try to differentiate between racial versus ethnic background. According to the article, racial background are loosely based on geographical boundaries, like white meaning people of Europe, the people of European ancestry, black or African American people of African ancestry, Asians being people with from the countries that are in Asia, and so on. There are five broad racial categories. He, it says that whereas ethnic background is thought to be a lot more broad or a lot more specific than or a lot more inclusive than racial classification. The ethnic background is thought to include things like the cultural heritage of the people, their common history, religious religious heritage, and genetic heritage. So whereas race is thought to be related to only geography, ethnicity is thought to be much more encompassing, to involve an interplay of many factors. They also posit that geographical barriers influence patterns and ultimately genetic differentiation. Here they make a case for how distances between groups, people being enclosed by mountains and hills, and separation by oceans tend to tend to promote within group mating patterns that tend to propagate the presence of a particular gene line in a particular group. The next factor they bring up is that the sociocultural correlates of race and ethnic background. Here, racial and ethnic classifications are said to be fluid as they derive from an interplay of social, geographic, and cultural factors, meaning that as these factors change, both across time and in the way they interact with one another, the racial and ethnic classifications could also change along with it. Evidence of this is said to be seen in a multicultural and multiracial society like the United States. Another factor is that socioeconomic status, which they recognize to be strongly correlated with race and ethnicity. The and we all know that socioeconomic status is a predictor of access to quality care and education. So the authors didn't really talk about this, but we the question that arises to mind readily becomes: is this a confounder in race ethnic disparities, especially where could this lead to cases where um, racial causes are attributed to things that are not related to race? They move on to provide some evidence for genetic differentiation among races. According to the authors, population genetics reveal genetic variation within and across racial groups and ethnic groups. The variation in frequency of alleles underlying disease or normal phenotypes are said to lead to differences in the phenotypes that they express. They go on to talk about a magical line that determines race specific and non-race specific um, traits. So this is said to be the 20% mark. By this, they indicate that alleles with a frequency of 20% or more in one racial group are likely to be seen in another racial group. Conversely, alleles with frequency less than 20% are likely to be more specific to that racial group. By this, they are inferring that those that if you see features that are distinct to a particular ethnic group, it's more likely that the alleles that code for that uh, um, their frequency is less than 20%. And according to them, Africans have a higher diversity because they have a larger number of low frequency alleles. The this discussion, this argument, this debate is now further stretched forward to genetic differences in diseases among racial and ethnic groups. They go on to talk about mutant alleles with frequency less than 2% being specific to a single ethnic group within a particular race. This, they say, explains certain features that are specific to groups like the Ashkenazi Jews, the French Canadians, the Amish, and European Gypsies. Mutant alleles with frequency of greater than 2% but less than 20% are said to be specific to a particular racial group. Examples given include the factor V leading um, and Cardiff 15, which have more frequency in whites compared to other racial groups. They talk about racial and ethnic differences being clues to interactions between the groups. An example I had mentioned earlier, which is the endogamous or within group mating practices that for that tend to cause retention of particular mutations within those specific groups that really don't mate outside themselves. However, it must be noted that genes for complex diseases um, can be seen in more than one ethnic group, irrespective of the frequency at which they vary. Though the authors still make a case that in such cases that you still need to do a racial classification because it could give you a pointer to who has a higher risk or who has a lower risk for that particular disease. In concluding their article, the authors conclude that there are racial and ethnic differences in the causes, expression, and prevalence of various diseases. Even when genetic determinants of a complex disease is present in all racial and ethnic groups, ethnic and racial classification may offer additional important insights. They also speak of benefit. They conclude that benefits in diagnosis and research outweigh the cost that could potentially be associated with linking race and ethnicity with genetics. We move to the Rain article. The Frank Rain article has its main thesis as social and environmental factors explaining racial disparities that are seen in health outcomes. They say there's no genetic basis to this, and they attempt to deconstruct claims of genetic basis for race and ethnicity. According to the author, the biological conceptualization of race and ethnicity are based on three broad claims. Claim one is the inference of ancestry from genetic markers. According to the author, this is mainly based upon a group of genes that are called ancestry informative markers. These are predetermined markers of geographic ancestry. You can compare this to the from the previous article where they talk about the geographical basis for racial groups and races in different places having specific alleles to them that could mark their features out. The second point for this claim is that population clusters are based upon a common genotype. You could also compare this to the claim about certain genotypes being more specific to particular racial groups or particular ethnic group. The author's response to this claim is that human genetic variation is still poorly structured and that any attempt to categorize the structure would be subject to sample selection and methodological biases. So it may not readily tell you if this is truly specific to this race or not because you're being selective as to how you pick. The Also, that genetic and phenotypic variation is not distributed at population level and does not match up to racial categories. Well, the author does not provide any proof for this, and I tend to want to believe more, to believe more of what the evidences that were provided by the prior article. Claim 2 is the identification of genotypes that vary across population groups. That the basis for this is that if an individual's race can be inferred from their genetic makeup, then race may be used to learn something about the genetic basis of the disease. Another point is that alleles with significantly different frequency between groups are potential predictors of disease risk. The author's response to this is that research results can be confounded by presence of non-disease related genes that have different allele frequency across groups. St- though studies attempt to control for this by focusing on one population, but this would ultimately result in selection and methodological issues, just like we see in Claim 1. I tend to agree with the author in that this is a very important point so that we can correctly ascribe to race causes that are due to it and not causes that are due to unmeasured environmental factors. Another source of confounding is correlation between estimates of phenotypic differences and non-genetic factors. For instance, SES, so that's socioeconomic status. The third claim is that is for genetic and racial disparities of health in health. Differences in disease. The main point here is that differences in disease prevalence or etiology between races are due to genetic differences. Also, that's pointing that there's a genetic basis to racial disparities in health. The author cited the case of a case of a study on lung cancer, where there was a study of five racial groups. The authors of that particular study had found that among moderate smokers, African Americans and Native Hawaiians were significantly more likely to develop lung cancer. And this difference persisted after controlling for socioeconomic status like occupation, education, and this led the authors to infer a probable genetic basis. However, this difference is not in risk is not seen in heavy smokers or non-smokers. The the author for this particular article, Frank Green, did not give any particular response on this. Rather, he discussed. He went on to cite editorials that seem to um, propagate this, saying that they did not tread with caution and they did not give adequate attention to to environmental factors that might possibly explain this. In con- In conclusion, Frank Rome said that the instability of ancestry estimates, the absence of established relationships between genetic variants and phenotypes, strong correlation between ancestry and unmeasured exposures, as well as omitted variable bias, all threaten the validity of genetic analysis that use race and ethnic categories as valid units of analysis. One thing that you would note from these two articles is that um, one tends to promote a strong biologic basis, while the other tries to promote a discussion that doesn't exactly refute the biologic basis, but at the same time invites us to look for other explanations to race and ethnic disparities, other than jumping to conclusion that um, every single difference in race is due to it has a genetic basis. The discussion is still continuing with many researchers, depending on their background, um, joining different parts of the debate. Personally, for me, I think race does not explain every single genetic basis does not explain every single disparity you see, but to ignore race genetic basis for race and ethnic differences would be to lose a very important part in research.